Alright guys, with the cancellation of multiple events and one of the most important fights of all time having to be held behind closed doors with no audience, the COVID-19 outbreak has proven to be one of the biggest disasters for the sport of MMA. However, when the dust finally settles and we're able to put the coronavirus behind us, there is another disaster waiting for us that, while not nearly as serious as the pandemic, could still potentially have a longer lasting negative effect on the sport, and that is the upcoming Bantamweight title bout between Henry Cejudo and Jose Aldo. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the backstory here, Henry Cejudo is the current Bantamweight champion and former flyweight champion, having previously held both titles simultaneously. He won the flyweight title by defeating one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson in a controversial split decision win, yet still a commendable performance by the man. He then moved up to defeat Marlon Moraes for the vacant Bantamweight Championship in one of the greatest, most heroic comeback victories I had ever seen in the sport, making me a full-fledged Cejudo fan up until he started opening his mouth afterward. Jose Aldo is another one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest featherweight of all time, being the last WEC featherweight champion with 2 defenses before being promoted as the UFC featherweight champion after the 2 companies merged. He defended the title 7 times, defeating the likes of Kenny Florian, Frankie Edgar, Korean Zombie, and Chad Mendes, all before falling to Conor McGregor back in 2015. After having an up and down career since his loss to McGregor, the aging legend decided to make one last attempt at achieving UFC gold again by moving down in weight and trying his hand in the bantamweight division, and this is where our problems begin. Jose Aldo would be booked against Marlon Moraes, who Cejudo defeated to win the bantamweight belt. The fight was close with a back and forth first round, a dominant second round by Aldo, and a somewhat uneventful third round that could have been scored for either fighter. Marlon Moraes would end up winning the fight by split decision, seemingly putting an end to Aldo's run before it even began. That was, however, until Cejudo opened his mouth. The king of cringe himself, who had been campaigning for a quote-unquote tuna fight since winning his second title, texted Dana after the bout, criticizing the judge's decision and saying that he wanted to defend the belt against Jose Aldo despite the loss. Dana, who had been looking to win back the Brazilian market since Aldo's decline, and also since the fall of MMA legend Anderson Silva, decided to bend a knee to Triple C and book this fight for UFC 250. Now, as would be expected, this booking resulted in a fair amount of criticism from fans and media alike, as it very well should be in my opinion. But there are still some fans out there, some media members, and even some fighters who are expressing their support and interest in this fight, which for me is disappointing to say the least. I myself do not care for this fight, I do not care about the outcome, and I will not be previewing this fight, nor will I be giving my prediction on it. And if the rest of the UFC 250 card sucks, I probably will not be watching this fight. I argue that if you are an MMA fan, or even care about meritocracy in any sport, or any aspect of life whatsoever, you should be just as angry and disappointed in this fight being booked as I am, and here's why. The bantamweight division is in no way a shallow division, and it is not without its rightful contenders. We have Petr Yan riding a 9-fight winning streak, having defeated the number 8 ranked Jimmy Rivera, and also getting a brutal finish over MMA legend Uriah Faber, another big name that Cejudo was looking to cash in on. There's Aljamain Sterling riding a 4-fight winning streak, who also holds a win over Jimmy Rivera, as well as the number 7 ranked Pedro Munoz. And we have Corey Sandhagen riding a 7-fight winning streak, holding wins over the number 5 ranked Rafael Assunção, as well as former top bantamweight John Lineker. Jose Aldo was able to come into a division of killers who are doing nothing short of putting in the work for the ultimate goal of becoming a champion, and was able to not only skip the line to fight the number 1 ranked bantamweight fighter right under Cejudo, but was also able to take a loss and still be ranked at number 6 in the division, which is a huge insult to the up-and-comers looking to break into the top 10, and he was awarded a title shot, which is a huge insult to the top contenders that I named earlier. Now, the biggest argument I've heard in favor of this fight happening is that in many of the fans' eyes, Jose Aldo did in fact beat Marlon Moraes, despite the judge's decision. Now, God knows just how much I hate bad calls from judges myself, and we've seen time and time again how incompetent officials are able to negatively affect a fighter's future or even overall legacy, which is absolutely unfair and unjust. But Jose Aldo versus Marlon Moraes was nothing close to a robbery in my opinion. I myself scored the fight for Marlon Moraes, and I'm not just saying that to be a jerk and try to better my argument. I thought it was an extremely close fight, and I wouldn't have been up in arms if Aldo was called the winner, but in the end, he wasn't. I think a lot of fans get fixated on that second round, in which Aldo landed what were probably the most effective strikes in the entire fight. And I don't just mean his most effective strikes, I mean the most effective strikes of either of them. But these fans also tend to forget that there is a 10-point must system in place, and fights are scored round by round. And as one-sided as that second round was, it did not warrant a 10-8 in my opinion. I also believe that fans are overscoring Jose's aggression and octagon control in the last round, where the stats actually show Moraes outlanding Aldo. Since the judging criteria was revamped years ago, except for in Texas of course, things like aggression and octagon control are no longer scored over effective strikes landed. And I don't think they ever should have been, as I believe that they are superficial stats and really don't account for which fighter is truly being more effective in a fight. But that's a whole different argument for another day. Overall, while many fans believe that Jose Aldo won this fight, and it can definitely be argued, this fight was in no way a robbery, and in no way should Jose Aldo be granted a title shot off of this loss, especially when, just before the fight, Petr Yan put himself on a 9-fight winning streak by brutalizing Uriah Faber, not even allowing the judges to have a hand in who won that fight. Or when you have Sterling and Sandhagen out there, fighting the best of the division and leaving no doubt about their victories. Now, despite my arguments, if you honestly still believe that Jose Aldo won this fight against Marlon Moraes without a shadow of a doubt, then I can at least understand why you'd still want to see him fight for the belt despite the official call. However, there are some fans and media members out there with a certain sentiment towards fight bookings like this, and towards the sport of MMA in general, that I believe is the real underlying problem here.
I'm not a big one on, meaningful things for the division, or I like fights. I want to see a good fighter fight a good fighter. And that, to me, that's all that matters to me.
Now, without meaningful fights within the divisions, without some form of meritocracy, and without an endgame, how do we determine which fighters are good fighters, and which ones are among the greats? What is a good fighter to us, and what are we basing that off of? What exactly do we want to see when we watch MMA?
If I'm watching the game, like I always say it like this, like you ever, like when you get a video game like Street Fighter, like who are you gonna pick? Who are you gonna pick? You know what I'm saying? I want to pick the baddest looking motherfucker right there who does the coolest shit.
Now, God knows just how much of a Nate Diaz fan that I am, and just how much I love watching him fight, but I just can't agree with this analogy here. This idea of fighting should only be that of casual viewers, and not that of fans or media members who want to see competitive MMA, and who want MMA to be known by the rest of the world as legitimate competition. If you're just casually playing Street Fighter or any other fighting game with friends just for fun, then of course you're either going to pick the coolest, most toughest looking character with the flashiest moveset, or you're going to pick an iconic character who you recognize from a commercial or whatever, and you're just going to play to your heart's content. But if you actually want to beat the game, you're going to have to go through single player mode with whatever character you pick, and fight the rest of the characters on your level before moving up to the harder, unlockable characters that you probably can't play as in the regular game until you finally reach the last boss. Even if you want to take it a step further and play the game competitively against other people for a grand prize, you're not going to base your character pick off of how cool they look or how cool their moveset looks. You're going to pick the character with the most effective moveset, no matter how cool or uncool they may look. In real life mixed martial arts, we shouldn't measure a fighter's greatness by how cool they are, by how entertaining they are, or by how valuable their name is. We should measure fighters by their physical abilities, their speed, power, strength, and endurance, their heart, determination, and toughness, their technical mastery and precision, and how effectively they can put all of these aspects of their game into practice by fighting their way up the ranks and into championship level competition. Jose Aldo and Henry Cejudo have already proven themselves as two of the best of all time, but how did they get there? As impressive as Jose Aldo looked in the regional scene, he wasn't just thrown into a title fight when he was picked up by the WEC. He had to amass an impressive 5-fight winning streak before being given that opportunity. Even Henry Cejudo, the youngest Olympic gold medalist in history, wasn't thrown into championship fights just based off his accolades outside of MMA. He had to win 6 fights in the regional scene, 4 fights in the UFC before getting his first title fight, and then win another 3 fights impressively after losing his first attempt at the belt. These two men undoubtedly put in the work for the place they both hold in the sport today, but by taking this fight, they are both denying the next generation of fighters who have also put in the work the chance to make a name for themselves and earn the same opportunities that they had. Now, in the end, no matter how upset the booking of this fight makes me, and no matter how unfair and unjust I think it is for the true bantamweight contenders, I can't blame Cejudo for wanting this fight, I can't blame Aldo for taking this fight, and I can't blame the UFC for booking it, because ultimately, these 3 parties are in the business of making money. While I firmly believe that most fighters who enter the sport come in with a competitive mindset, wanting to see how far they can push their abilities and possibly become champions, I feel that more and more we're seeing fighters who do reach that level become more concerned about their future after fighting and make decisions accordingly, or they're influenced by family members, coaches, and managers to do so, as they very well should be. Again, after the fall of Brazilian MMA's most notable names in the UFC, we see Dana and company looking to win back that market by giving the Brazilian fans what they want. And if they feel that booking this fight is the best way to do just that, then they are doing what a multi-billion-dollar company should be doing. However, MMA media and true MMA fans should not base what they want to see in the sport on the UFC's bottom line, or even the fighters' bottom line. If we want to see these fighters who reach the top level of the sport make enough money to have a bright future after retirement, then we should call on the UFC to compensate these fighters accordingly for defending their titles and putting their health on the line against the toughest fighters within their own divisions. That way, these fighters aren't inclined to chase money fights once they have some sort of leverage. Also, when we see these fighters at the top level who have had the opportunities and have made the amount of money that most fighters can only dream of, actively using their positions in the company and the sport to call their own shots and deny rising talent the same opportunities that they've had, then we should criticize them for it, and we should refuse to pay for these nonsensical fights. It's ultimately our job to push for legitimacy in this sport. Now, there is a time to pander to the casual audience, and there is a time for novelty fights, but it's not when the actual world title is involved, and these types of fights should not be promoted above championship level competition. Scott Coker made a habit of this when he took over Bellator, and made a complete mockery of the sport to the public when the biggest spotlights were on him. By promoting and supporting nonsensical matchmaking, we're sending a message to the rest of the world that yes, this sport is very entertaining, but it's not a sport to be taken seriously, and with that, the casual fans will remain just casual fans. When I had first started becoming a fan of MMA, I noticed that a lot of MMA fans at the time were boxing fans who were tired of the politics in boxing, tired of the top fighters not facing each other, and they took a liking to MMA because the sport had not nearly been as corrupted. I always felt that as the sport became more popular, more mainstream, and more lucrative, that it would eventually go the way of boxing, and that I had to appreciate it for what it was at the time. With more and more focus on so-called money fights over fights that actually make sense for the bigger picture of each division, I'm afraid that the day that MMA becomes unwatchable is getting closer.
The guy is delusional. He needs to fight an actual contender in this division, either myself, a Pedion, or even I would even watch a rematch with Marlon Moraes. You know what I mean? Fight someone who deserves it. Fight someone who's on a win streak. Fight someone who's winning, not a guy who hasn't fought in 4 years, who's been on the couch just commentating. Not a guy who's lost his first debut fight in the bantamweight division, who's 2-4 in his last 6 fights. Fight someone who's going to add some substance, not just these clown fights that this guy is trying to make. I don't even know. This guy is just crazy. At this point, I think he might have lost it.